Hey, how's it going? Zach D Productions here, and I'm here for a ranking video for you guys. So for this video, I'll be ranking the legendary discography of Soulfly. Now, Soulfly, I don't know what you want to call them, thrash metal. In the first part of their career, they were basically Sepultura Part 2, because if you didn't know, Max Cavalera, the frontman of Soulfly, used to be in Sepultura, then he moved on to Soulfly, and the first album definitely sounds like Sepultura, and then after that they started to basically find their sound and kind of combine some new metal elements. I mean, that was basically the big thing back in the late 90s and early 2000s is, you know, new metal, so they probably wanted to fit in with that. So let's go ahead and get started with this ranking. We'll go from worst to best based on my opinion, of course, so let's go ahead and get started. So what I have last at the bottom, their weakest album, I gotta go with Omen. This album here, I only think is decent. I mean, there's not really much to say about this album. It's just not as good as the other stuff that they put out. Honestly, kind of forgettable, but I wouldn't call the album garbage or anything. It's just kind of meh for me. Next, we have Savages, another one of their weakest in my opinion. I do kind of like what they're going for here. I mean, it's a step up from Omen for sure. I do like Bloodshed. That's maybe my favorite song on the album. And, you know, I kind of do dig the dark sound on this album. It sounds kind of doomy at times. So, yeah, there are some things to like about this album, but all in all, it's just not one of their best. Next, we actually have their latest album, Totem. Now, if I were to do this ranking like a few months ago, this album probably would have been a lot higher, but the album has honestly not held up that well. Now, I still think it's a pretty good album. I think from this point on, we're getting into the very good stuff from Soulfly. But with this album here, you of course have Scouring the Vile, Filth Upon Filth, and Damage Done. Title track's pretty cool too, but yeah, the second half of this album, I think, is kind of where it falls off a bit. But I wouldn't say it's bad, though. But yeah, there's some solid stuff on this album. The production is kind of meh, kind of a step down from what they've done before. But still, all in all, pretty good, I'd say. Pretty good album. Next, we have 3. This is one of the earlier albums from Soulfly. And out of the, I guess, early days of Soulfly, this is probably the weakest among that era. But still, I think the album is pretty good. I mean, I think Tree of Pain is probably my favorite song on the album. Really dig that song. I mean, there's other pretty good songs on the album as well, but again, when it comes to the, I guess, first few Soulfly albums, this is probably the weakest among those. But honestly, it's still not bad. I still think it's pretty good for what it is. Next, we have Archangel. I like the production on this album. There's some pretty good songs on here. I mean, if I had to choose a favorite song on here, it would probably be Shamash, I think it's called. I've always really dug that song even when I first got into Soulfly. That's a song that I reached for a lot. So, yeah, pretty good song. And there's other good songs on the album as well, like Titans and title track. So, yeah, Archangel, pretty good album, I'd say. Next, we have Ritual. I dig the production on this album. There's some very good songs on the album, especially in the first half of the album, like the title track and Dead Behind the Eyes. A lot of great stuff on this album for sure. Evil Empowered. Yeah. Pretty good album, I'd say, from Soulfly. And again, pretty good production. I think it was well produced and everything like that. And Max, he sounds pretty good on this album. Very aggressive and everything. So, yeah, really good album. Next, we have Conqueror. Really strong album, I'd say. Unleash is probably my favorite song on here. Another album where I think it has some pretty good production. I mean, a lot of good stuff on this album for sure. So, Conqueror, really good one. And then we move on to the top 5. Now, you could interchange these. I'm sure a lot of these albums would make a lot of people's top 5s, but this is just my top 5. So next we have Prophecy. Definitely a really good album. I mean, you of course can't go wrong with the title track, Living Sacrifice, Execution Style. The first half of this album, yeah, you could say it's stronger than the second half, but all in all, still pretty good. During this time, this is where they were starting to kind of step away from the new metal stuff, you could say. I mean, there's still a little bit of that in this album, you know, but it's not as present as it was in Primitive or 3 or anything, but they were starting to move away from that in this album, but still, I think the album is really good, so Prophecy. Next, we have Enslaved. And I think among the modern era of Soulfly, I'd say that this is probably the best among that era. A lot of strong stuff on this album. Resistance, Gladiator, which is probably my favorite on the album. What else you got on here? You also have World Scum. You also have Revengeance. You have Intervention as well. A lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff. Very dark and heavy, doomy sounding stuff going on here as well. Kind of different, kind of unique for Soulfly. Really good album, I'd say. And really good production as well. That's something that I do have to say. But now we're here at the top 3, which I don't think a lot of fans of Soulfly would argue with my top 3, but at number 3 we have Dark Ages. And this was actually one of the first Soulfly albums I've ever checked out. Might have actually been the first, and honestly, not a bad first, I'd say. I mean, you of course have Babylon, you have Arise Again, Frontlines, Feel the Hate, you have Bleak. A lot of great stuff on this album for sure. Very raw sounding and heavy stuff. Maybe one of the heaviest albums of Soulfly's career. Really good album, I'd say. Really good one. Definitely one of their best, easily, I'd say. But at number 2, I gotta go with the debut, Soulfly. This album is basically Sepultura Part 2. I mean, I know that a lot of people kind of label it as that. This album is great. I do think it's a really great album, though. Really strong debut for Soulfly. You have Eye for an Eye, No Hope, No Fear, Bleed. You have Tribe. What else you got on here? You also have No. A lot of strong stuff. A lot of strong stuff on this album for sure. So the debut from Soulfly, really good. Easily one of the best albums of their career, I'd say. And if you have not heard it, definitely check it out. And would this be a good start if you're just now wanting to check out Soulfly? I would definitely say so. Because, well, it is the debut, the start of their discography. So, yeah, very raw, aggressive, heavy stuff. Really good album. But at number 1, you probably know what it is at this point. It's got to be Primitive. And I think this is a great album. I mean, you really can't go wrong with anything on this album. I mean, you of course have Back to the Primitive. You also have Bring It. You also have the song Pain, which I think is great. But yeah, just a lot of great stuff on this album for sure. I mean, this is really where Soulfly started to combine, I guess, the new metal stuff in with their sound. This is basically, at least for the time being, Soulfly were really trying to find themselves as far as their sound is concerned. There's a lot of like tribal stuff going on here in this album, and I think it works for them. It does, and I'd say that this is the pinnacle of Soulfly's discography, and honestly, in my opinion, their best album. So Primitive is at number 1, my favorite album from Soulfly. So let me know what you guys think. How would you rank Soulfly's discography? What did you think of this ranking? Feel free to let me know. So on that note, thanks for watching and have a good one.